State and territory leaders are still behind closed doors trying to reach agreement with the Prime Minister on several different fronts. Today's COAG is supposed to focus on efforts to set up a national scheme to prevent domestic violence. Also high on the list of concerns for the states and territories is the future of Commonwealth funding for schools and hospitals. The GST isn't on the official agenda, but the stoush over Western Australia's share has dominated discussion up to this point.
This is the usual pantomime we get when we come to Canberra. Western Australia whinge about the GST and we're all meant to jump up and down, shock and horror. We've got many more important things on the agenda to discuss. This isn't even on the agenda. And so from my perspective, it's a distraction and it doesn't deserve any more attention than that.
Are you concerned that it is overshadowing more important things such as domestic violence?
We won't let it do that.
What are your
agenda though? Are you confident that all the agenda items can be resolved?
Absolutely. We had a really positive discussion last night with the Prime Minister and I think we'll make some real headway today.
The clear view is that almost unequivocally these states are opposed to any tinkering at all with this system. The federal government have always said that they will work with the consensus of the states. I think it's pretty obvious where that consensus now sits. It's a no-brainer. It should be a very short conversation today about the GST, and I would urge the federal government to accept the position the states have taken.
We say to Western Australia, listen, we understand there is a short-term challenge that you are facing, but they do have the capacity, they have the levers to be able to address it, and you shouldn't change the whole system for those single issues. And certainly they've got a capacity to deal with it, and that's what they should do.
It's now up to the Prime Minister to sort out the fallout from GST.
Well, I think the important point today is that yes, this GST allocation debate is interesting, and yes, there are challenges that WA have to deal with. But my encouragement to them is to look at their own budget position and look for opportunities to bring back additional revenue that they're seeking. But the biggest issue here is the health funding, the health and education funding. That, quite frankly, makes the GST debate that we're talking about right now dwarf to a pimple on the size of the pumpkin, because a pumpkin is huge in the context of the challenges we are facing, as in health funding. I mean, the health funding is something that is completely and utterly unsustainable and long-term as it currently sits, and that is a challenge that we must deal with today, and it's something that I will be raising, because what happened last budget, completely unacceptable. We got to a position where we woke up and saw that the long-term funding of health and education had been shifted back to the states.
The Grants Commission have made their ruling. Not everybody's happy with that, but the notion that you would change the rules, that you'd get rid of the umpire because you didn't like the decision, and that politicians are going to sit around a table today and carve up the GST state by state, territory by territory, that's not going to happen. We're about to have a taxation discussion, and that's the right place to be talking about these things. Not to be acting the way that some have been. There is a full agenda. We need to deal with those issues, and I have to agree with Mike Baird when he says that $80 billion out of hospitals and schools, that's the first order issue, not an individual allocation for 1 year of GST to one particular state.
The majority of premiers are in agreement that the massive cuts to health and education is our priority. You need to have a system where the allocation is fair, and at the moment we're seeing some $80 billion cut from our schools and our hospitals. In relation to the GST carve-up, of course, we know that the independent umpire has made their decision. Their decision is very clear in relation to this issue, and we also know that all the treasurers, bar Western Australia, have signed a letter to the Federal Treasurer putting forward an end to this case.
Well, as we heard there from the Queensland Premier Anastasia Palaszczuk, 7 state and territory treasurers have penned a joint letter to Joe Hockey, urging him to respect the recommendations of the Commonwealth Grants Commission. Only one name is missing from the letter. WA's treasurer hasn't signed it. That's because, under the recommendations from the Grants Commission, Western Australia's GST share next year will fall below 30 cents in the dollar. WA Premier Colin Barnett is none too happy about the approach of the eastern states.
We're not asking for a greater share. We're saying that at the moment $3.7 billion this year is taken off Western Australia and given to the other states. Can I remind you what those numbers are? $500 million to Tasmania, $750 million to South Australia, $600 million to Queensland, $142 million to the ACT and $1.7 billion to the Northern Territory. All I'm saying is that Western Australia cannot be hit anymore. And to suggest that while the rest of the country gets 90, 100 cents, sometimes over 100 cents in the dollar, Western Australians this year got just 38 cents in the dollar back, and for the coming financial year the Grants Commission has recommended just under 30 cents a dollar. Why is it that every other Australian is worth $1 and Western Australians are worth 30 cents?
Labor has endorsed an idea of a single payment, a one-off grant. Would you support that, or does this need to be sorted out long term?
Look, I'm arguing, as I have done for several years, for a complete reform of the GST arrangements. The Grants Commission served Australia well, but it was invented in the 1930s and probably belongs back there. I am not asking for any bailout or anything else. I'm just saying, with iron ore prices having collapsed, Western Australia cannot continue to be paying $3.7 billion, in fact above that next year, to the other states. So I'm saying just stop trying to push us even further down. West Australians fully understand this issue and they are extremely angry about it.
What do you make of the 7 treasurers writing to the Treasurer about GST distribution, saying they want no changes?
I was extremely disappointed by that. I was disappointed that both Liberal and Labor governments around Australia should gang up on one state government. I have never in my experience seen the other states and territories gang up against a single state. And we are the state that is funding them and largely funding the Commonwealth budget because of the strength of the mining industry over recent years. I was just absolutely disappointed in those governments and individuals involved in that. That is not the way we should be doing business.